This is Discover USA Collapse, and today we are exposing a nightmare hiding inside your refrigerator. A story that touches nearly every household in America. Because while families sit down to dinner, thinking they are feeding their children something safe and comforting, entire states are quietly scrambling to recall massive amounts of cheese that turned out to be contaminated, dangerous, and in some cases, deadly. With headlines breaking that 48 states are now involved in one of the largest recalls in recent food history. And yet most consumers still have no idea that the brands they trust, the ones they've been buying for years, could already be sitting on their kitchen shelves, waiting to cause sickness or worse. And what makes this story even more chilling is how deep it goes. Because we're not just talking about a bad batch or a single spoiled product, we're talking about systemic failures, corporate greed, ignored warnings, and regulatory bodies that reacted far too late, leaving millions of unsuspecting Americans exposed. So imagine biting into what you thought was a simple grilled cheese sandwich, or sprinkling shredded cheese over your family's pasta, only to later discover that the very product you bought was under an urgent federal recall. A product that officials now admit should not only be removed from stores immediately, but destroyed at all costs, because the risks are simply too high. And if you're wondering how this could happen in 2025, in a country that prides itself on food safety, the truth will shake you because the cracks in the system are bigger than anyone realized. And by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why experts are warning that these 3 cheese brands could be the biggest betrayal of consumer trust we've seen in decades. And why it is no exaggeration when watchdog groups say, don't buy them, don't eat them. And if you have them in your home, throw them out now. Number 3, Kraft. And let me be very clear here. This is not just another brand in the cheese aisle. This is the household name. The company that defined comfort food in America. The label that parents trust when they toss a pack of singles into the cart without thinking. The brand that has been woven into American culture through TV commercials, school lunches, and decades of nostalgia. But in 2025, that trust was ripped apart when Kraft was tied to one of the most alarming cheese recalls in recent memory. And the story isn't about a minor slip-up or a mislabeled ingredient. It's about systemic failures that led to contamination. On such a massive scale that 48 states are now dealing with fallout. A contamination that's centered around listeria. A bacteria so dangerous it doesn't just make people sick, it can kill, particularly newborns, pregnant women, and seniors. And the shocking part is that this wasn't an unpredictable, sudden crisis. No, internal documents revealed by whistleblowers suggested that Kraft had been warned by their own quality control teams for months, maybe even years, that their facilities were failing sanitation checks with machinery that wasn't properly sterilized, standing pools of water where bacteria could thrive, and rushed production schedules that valued volume over safety. And yet, instead of fixing the problems, the company doubled down on pumping out millions of units to keep up with demand, filling Walmart shelves and stocking Costco freezers with products that should have been pulled long before they reached the consumer. Now imagine this from the perspective of an ordinary family. You pack your kids' lunch with Kraft singles. You make a grilled cheese sandwich on a rainy day. You prepare mac and cheese for a family dinner, all without knowing that those slices and shreds have been flagged in internal emails as potential health hazards. And by the time the FDA stepped in, it was too late because contaminated shipments had already been distributed across nearly the entire country, with early reports estimating that over 20 million individual packages might have been compromised. And this isn't an abstract number. This is the scale of exposure that touches school cafeterias, daycare centers, hospital kitchens, and nursing homes, places where the most vulnerable populations, children and the elderly, are directly consuming Kraft cheese daily. And sure enough, hospital records began showing clusters of illnesses that traced back to the contaminated batches, with parents posting frantic warnings on social media about their children's sudden fevers and stomach pains, while elderly patients in retirement communities described terrifying neurological symptoms consistent with advanced listeria infection. And the pressure on Kraft was mounting fast. Yet instead of acting with urgency, the company initially issued what they called limited recalls, quietly pulling select lots in a handful of states while insisting that the risk to consumers is extremely low. a phrase designed to protect the brand's reputation, but one that backfired spectacularly once the CDC confirmed multiple hospitalizations linked to the outbreak. And here's where the betrayal cuts the deepest. Because Kraft wasn't just selling a product, it was selling trust, positioning itself as the safe, affordable staple that parents could always rely on. But when you learn that executives delayed broad recalls until watchdog groups and independent labs forced their hand by releasing damning test results online, you realize that consumer safety wasn't their top priority. It was corporate image and profit margins. And that realization has sparked a wave of outrage across America, with lawsuits piling up from families demanding accountability, from parents whose children were hospitalized to caregivers of seniors whose health has been permanently damaged. And as this scandal unfolds in courtrooms, it's exposing just how much the public has been misled. Because while Kraft projected the image of wholesome, family-friendly reliability, behind the scenes, their cost-cutting and corner-cutting allowed a deadly pathogen to spread unchecked. And the damage to their brand may be irreversible. Because no amount of commercials with smiling kids and melted cheese can undo the image of hospital beds filled with victims of contamination. And the question now isn't just whether Kraft can recover financially, it's whether Americans can ever again bite into a Kraft cheese slice without wondering what invisible dangers lurk beneath the plastic wrapper. And when a brand becomes a symbol of betrayal at the dinner table, the very heart of family life. It's not just a recall, it's a cultural wound, one that will leave scars long after the shelves are restocked. Number 2, Sargento, a brand that has long marketed itself as the real cheese alternative, the premium choice you reach for when you want something authentic instead of processed slices, the label that has built an entire identity around trust, family values, and wholesome Midwestern pride. But in 2025, that glossy reputation collapsed under the weight of one of the most devastating recalls the cheese industry has ever faced. Because while millions of Americans believed Sargento stood for quality and safety, hidden behind the branding was a slow-moving disaster that finally exploded into public view when state health departments began linking multiple listeria outbreaks to its products. And what made this scandal even more gut-wrenching than Kraft's was the sheer scale of denial and cover-ups. Because Sargento positioned itself as the brand that cared more, that paid closer attention, that respected its customers like family. And yet behind closed doors, inspectors had been flagging violations at Sargento plants for months before the recalls. Violations that included unsanitary conveyor belts, malfunctioning refrigeration systems, and storage facilities that failed basic temperature control requirements, the very conditions that allow dangerous pathogens to thrive. And still the company continued to flood supermarkets across all 48 states with millions of packages of sliced cheddar, mozzarella, and shredded blends. Products that quickly became the subject of federal warnings, once it became clear that contamination was not limited to a single line, but had spread across multiple facilities. To understand how shocking this was to ordinary families, you have to remember what Sargento represents in the American imagination. It's not just cheese. It's the upgrade, the choice you make when you want better quality for your kids, the label you proudly serve at gatherings, the cheese you buy for the holiday table. So when the news hit that Sargento cheese was implicated in dozens of hospitalizations, with some reports of miscarriages linked to listeria poisoning, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. Because this wasn't bargain bin product, this was the supposedly safe, premium brand that people paid more for. And yet, it was sending vulnerable Americans to emergency rooms. And the timeline makes it worse, because leaked reports suggest Sargento executives had been warned about bacterial contamination as early as January. But the company did not act until March, meaning for 2 full months contaminated cheese was being produced, shipped, and sold, all while consumers remained in the dark. And by the time a national recall was finally issued, those products had already been served in school lunches, sliced onto burgers at restaurants, and stocked into the refrigerators of millions of families who had no reason to question their safety. And when people began to connect the dots, when families with hospitalized relatives started to compare notes online, the picture that emerged was devastating. Sargento had ignored multiple red flags, issued limited recalls only after public pressure, and consistently downplayed the risks in press statements that assured Americans everything was under control, even as independent labs continued to detect dangerous bacterial levels in products pulled straight off store shelves. And this delay didn't just cost money, it cost lives. Because listeria isn't like ordinary food poisoning. It can incubate quietly in the body for weeks before triggering severe neurological symptoms, meningitis, or pregnancy complications. And when you realize that Sargento cheese is a staple in hospitals, daycare centers, and elderly care homes, you understand how catastrophic those weeks of denial truly were. And it raises haunting questions about how many victims there really are. Because for every case that makes headlines, countless others go unreported, brushed off as a bad stomach bug or just the flu. When in fact they were the result of contaminated Sargento products that should have been destroyed long before they ever hit the shelves. The backlash has been swift and ferocious. Lawsuits pouring in from across the country, consumer watchdog groups calling for criminal investigations, and state attorneys general demanding accountability. But the damage to public trust may be beyond repair, because the very identity of the Sargento brand, family, authenticity, safety, has been shattered. And as Americans share photos of half-eaten packages with visible mold, as parents post heartbreaking stories of children writhing in pain after eating what should have been a simple snack, as seniors in nursing homes suffer terrifying bouts of infection, it's becoming clear that this scandal will not fade quickly, and it forces us to confront a bigger, more disturbing reality. If even the so-called premium brands, the ones that charge more precisely because they claim to be safer and better, are cutting corners and putting profits before people, then what does that say about the food system as a whole? And how can consumers ever again feel confident that the cheese they buy, the food they serve at their dinner tables, is truly safe? Because Sargento's downfall isn't just about bacteria. It's about the betrayal of a promise, the betrayal of a brand that told us we were paying for security and peace of mind, and instead delivered fear and grief. And that betrayal cuts deeper than any single recall notice ever could, leaving behind a wound in American kitchens that will take years to heal, if it ever does. Because when the product you once trusted most becomes a symbol of danger and deception, it changes not only how you shop, but how you see the corporations that claim to care about you. And the chilling truth is that no matter how many glossy ads they release, no matter how many times they rebrand, Sargento will forever be remembered as the company that let listeria slip through the cracks, and in doing so, reminded every American that when it comes to food safety, you are on your own. Number 1, Velveeta. And this is where the story turns from alarming to downright terrifying. Because unlike Kraft or Sargento, Velveeta isn't just cheese. It's an American cultural icon, a product so deeply embedded in family traditions, Super Bowl parties, holiday casseroles, and weeknight dinners that it's almost treated as sacred. The liquid gold that promises indulgence, comfort, and joy in a box. But behind that glossy yellow packaging and decades of nostalgic advertising lies one of the most disturbing food safety crises in modern history. A scandal so massive that health officials in 48 states have now classified Velveeta as a high-priority risk. She's a phrase almost never used in consumer food alerts. And if you think this is exaggeration, understand this. Velveeta was not just contaminated in isolated batches. It was discovered to have systemic problems across multiple plants, spanning months of production. And what investigators found was horrifying. Unsanitary vats where leftover product clung to the sides for days, poorly maintained heating systems that failed to kill pathogens, and warehouses with rodent infestations where finished boxes were stored before shipping. A nightmare scenario that led to widespread contamination with not only listeria, but also salmonella and in some cases, heavy metal residues from corroded equipment. And when these findings became public, consumers realized that Velveeta, the cheese they had trusted for generations, had become a toxic time bomb hiding in plain sight on grocery shelves. To grasp the gravity of this, you have to picture how widely Velveeta is consumed. Millions of pounds sold every year, baked into dips at family reunions, melted into nachos at stadiums, served in macaroni dishes in school cafeterias, blended into sauces at fast food chains, and reheated in microwaves. In dorm rooms across America, meaning the potential exposure here dwarfs almost any recall in living memory, and the consequences are playing out in real time, with hospitals reporting waves of illnesses tied directly to Velveeta consumption. everything from severe stomach infections in children to fatal complications in elderly patients, while consumer hotlines are overwhelmed by calls from frantic parents demanding to know if the boxes sitting in their pantries are safe. And what makes this crisis uniquely chilling is not just the breadth of contamination, but the deliberate silence that preceded it. Because documents leaked by insiders suggest that executives had been aware of minor safety issues for over a year, dismissing them as manageable risks, and only when entire truckloads of Velveeta tested positive for multiple pathogens did the truth become impossible to hide, forcing reluctant press releases and half-hearted, limited recalls that barely scratched the surface of the problem. And here's where the betrayal becomes almost unforgivable. Because Velveeta was never marketed as luxury. It was marketed as reliable, affordable, safe, the everyday choice for families who wanted consistency. And that image was carefully built through generations of advertising that equated Velveeta with love, family, and American pride. But when people began realizing that the product they were feeding their children carried deadly risks, the backlash was ferocious, with social media exploding in outrage. Parents posting videos of unopened Velveeta bricks oozing strange liquid, seniors describing months of unexplained illness, and whistleblowers stepping forward to reveal shocking details of cost-cutting measures that prioritized profit over sanitation, such as reusing vats without full sterilization, shipping boxes with visible damage, and pressuring workers to falsify safety logs to meet production quotas. A culture of negligence that transformed one of America's most beloved products into a weapon against the very families who built its legacy. The lawsuits have been staggering, with hundreds already filed nationwide, and more expected as the scope of the crisis unfolds. Class actions representing thousands of consumers demanding damages for medical bills, lost wages, and in some heartbreaking cases, wrongful death. And the legal battle is exposing layers of deception at the corporate level, from emails instructing managers to minimize negative publicity, to internal memos acknowledging unacceptable contamination risks months before recalls were issued. A paper trail that paints a picture of executives who knew, who had time to act, and who chose silence over safety. And the fallout isn't just financial, it's cultural, because Velveeta is not just food, it's tradition, it's nostalgia. It's a product that has been at the center of American tables for nearly a century. And now that name is forever tainted, associated not with joy, but with fear, not with comfort, but with betrayal. And as consumers toss unopened boxes into the trash, as stores strip shelves bare under government orders, the question echoing across the country is not just, how could this happen? But how many more times are we being lied to? Because if Velveeta, the brand that called itself Liquid Gold, was cutting corners this recklessly, how many other staples are quietly harboring similar dangers? And this is the chilling conclusion. When 48 states are simultaneously forced into emergency recalls, when federal agencies are scrambling to contain the fallout, and when hospitals are filling with patients who trusted a product they thought was safe, it is no longer a story about cheese. It is a story about a broken system, a system where corporate profit outweighs human health, where regulators act too late, and where families are left to discover the truth only after it's already sitting on their dinner plates. And Velveeta now stands as the most painful reminder yet that in today's America, not even the most familiar foods can be trusted. A reminder that every trip to the grocery store is a gamble, and a warning that until real accountability is enforced, these recalls will not be the last. They will only be the beginning. This is the part where everything comes together, and the truth hits harder than any single headline. Because when Kraft, Sargento, and Velveeta, three of the most trusted, recognizable cheese brands in the United States, end up at the center of recalls that span nearly the entire nation, the story is no longer about isolated accidents. It's about systemic failure, a pattern of negligence and profit. First decision-making that leaves ordinary families carrying the risk. And what makes this all the more chilling is how invisible. The danger was sitting quietly in lunchboxes, on holiday tables, in nursing home meals, hiding behind the comforting colors of familiar packaging, until suddenly hospitals were reporting clusters of illnesses. Mothers were losing pregnancies, and seniors were falling gravely ill, all from products they had no reason to doubt. This is what betrayal looks like. Not just spoiled food, but the collapse of trust, Because these brands were never just products. They were symbols of American tradition, woven into the fabric of everyday life. And when they chose silence, denial, and delay over immediate action, they didn't just poison consumers' bodies. They poisoned their faith in the system itself. And that's why this matters. Because the fallout goes beyond lawsuits and stock prices, it strikes at the core of what Americans assume about safety. It forces the question of how many other beloved brands are hiding similar secrets. How many other limited recalls are masking deeper problems? How many times regulators are looking the other way until it's too late? And the hardest part to face is that this may only be the tip of the iceberg, that the recalls we're seeing now are just the ones that became too big to suppress, while countless smaller risks pass unnoticed, waiting for their moment to erupt. But here's the reality you need to hear. The age of blind trust in food corporations is over. Because once you know that even the most iconic products in your pantry can turn deadly, you can't unknow it. And the only question left is what you, the consumer, will do with that knowledge. Will you demand accountability? Will you change your buying habits? Will you push back against a system that has shown time and again that your safety is secondary to their profits? The story of these three cheese brands will go down as one of the largest betrayals of consumer trust in American history. And the consequences will ripple for years, through courtrooms, through boardrooms, and most importantly, through kitchens, where families will never look at a slice of cheese the same way again. And maybe that's the one good thing to come out of this. Awareness, vigilance, the understanding that what we eat should never be taken for granted. Because food is not just commerce, it's survival. And when survival is compromised for corporate gain, it's time to ask ourselves, how much longer will we allow it? And how many more recalls will it take before Americans say enough is enough? So, I'll leave you with this. Check your fridge, check your shelves, and ask yourself if the products you've trusted for decades deserve that trust anymore. Because after watching entire states move to destroy millions of pounds of cheese, after hearing the stories of families devastated by illnesses they never saw coming, one thing is clear. When they tell you not to buy these brands, it's not hype, it's a warning. And ignoring it could cost you more than you ever imagined. Do you think these recalls will finally change how America shops for food? Or will we go back to blind trust the moment the shelves are restocked? Tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. Because here at Discover USA Collapse, we'll keep exposing the truths they don't want you to know.